My name is Alasdair Coles. I'm an associate something of the Faraday Institute. I'm a doctor at Revd Hospital, and I am involved in ministry within the Church of England. Amen. So we've got an hour together, and it's after lunch, and you've looked at the title of this and you're thinking, this isn't going to be relevant for me. I'm just going to have a quiet doze, be unchallenged, and wake up in time for tea. I know that's what you've been thinking. But I know that you are training, some of you, and some of you are already trained to be pastors in various different situations. And if you haven't already had this happen to you, this is going to happen to you. This thing is going to happen to you. It's after church, nice coffee going on over there, someone comes up to you looking a bit dishevelled, starts talking to you, and you tell straight away they're completely bonkers, right? And they're claiming to be Jesus or have seen Jesus or this or that, and they've come to you for spiritual advice. If that doesn't happen, the next thing is that your much beloved church warden, or what are they called in Baptist Church? Part of your lay leadership, elders, much beloved elder comes to you and says, my husband's just been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease and he's no longer interested in church. Or another thing that is going to happen to you, these are things that are going to happen to you, is that you are going to start to lose your memory, or you're going to start to recognise you're not quite as sharp as you were, and you're going to think, oh, where is God in all of this? So one or two or three of those things are going to happen to you. And I hope that something I say in this next hour will come back to you and think, aha, there's something helpful that he said. So this is about brain diseases and faith. And from my perspective, the interesting thing is that I think that the brain is involved in mediating religious faith and practice and experience. And brain diseases may interfere with those processes. So for me, as a kind of neurological nerd, I'm interested to know how we can understand the brain anatomy of religion. But you may say that's completely, of no interest to me. And so this is why you should be interested, is as a future pastor, or a pastor currently, would it not be helpful for you to understand how the people under your care, including yourself, who are affected with neurological diseases, might experience a change in their faith? And how much of that is down to their brain, determined by the disease, and how much is it down to them as people reacting to a serious event in their life? So I'm going to talk for about 20 minutes and then stop, and then we can have buzz groups. Keith, don't look like that. Don't look like Keith. You're going to buzz. And then we'll come back for another 20 minutes. This is someone who, this is a real person who came to see me as a doctor, very reluctantly. She came because she was told she had to come by her Catholic community because of these attacks or episodes where she would suddenly feel at peace. She had this sense of illumination, she had a sense of transformation, and she'd had these from as early as she could remember, and she interpreted them as a gift from God, and that had led to a religious interest and a religious profession in both senses of the word, in that she not only had she made a life profession, but she was also employed to, and remains employed, as one of the investigators of miracles through the Catholic magisterium. The person who was with her said, is this God or is it epilepsy? Fairly routine NHS consultation. So many of you will know this, and I'm going to move through it quite quickly, but there's a long and classical history of people with epilepsy being seen as special, being seen as somehow sacred, being seen as demonically possessed. And in some of our scriptures we might see traces of that. Now Dostoevsky wrote about a man, Prince Mishkin, who had convulsions, and just before the convulsions he would have episodes where sadness and darkness disappeared, all his doubts and worries were composed, and he had a sense of calm, a sense of joy and hope, and a blinding inner light flooded his soul. That was due to a particular part of his brain, Prince Mishkin's brain, being fired in an epileptic attack. And this is a transcript from an online chat room for people with epilepsy. And this is someone describing an attack that they're actually having whilst writing at their keyboard. So this isn't a convulsion, this is a partial seizure. And to begin with, this person is just aware that the fit is coming. And you see very clear English, this is the aura, the fit comes later. It's not going to be a bad one, it's come up fast, the slow burn is the worst. Here's the time. And as we read through it, you'll see that the seizure takes over, and although the person can report their experience, their ability to describe it breaks down, the language breaks down. I can feel fragments of identity speaking to me. It gets harder to describe. And here's the interesting thing. This person is having a positive experience during this seizure. It's the payoff for the bad times, the weary times. In these moments I kiss God. And then it becomes very difficult to understand what the person is saying. But as I read this, I want you to remind yourself of what you've read of the mystics as they describe their spiritual experiences. I can see all the colours now under your skin. Look at your hand. Do you doubt that you contain an infinity of shades? I can speak colour with my hands while the time lasts. It's coming. I break open like a chrysalis. I split. But you are the divine. I would be a river if I could. I would bleed eternal divine. See it now, all the colours. When you see all the colours, that is to taste the divine. Over soon. Keys like bone, the colours never leave us. God is spectrum, infinite spectrum. It's confused language, isn't it? The grammar's broken up. And if this person was talking to you, you would probably think they're bonkers, or some variant on that. And then it's over. Grammar returns. I had the fit. I'm fine, except I think I hit my elbow on something and I bit my tongue. And this is an absolutely unique piece of writing of someone undergoing this experience. It's never been published, other than by me. It's an absolutely unique resource of the experience of having one of these mystical or Dostoevsky epileptic seizures. And these seizures, which come from a particular part of the brain, have some fairly common features to them. And a sort of philosophical or theological question is to what extent we would say that these are religious or not. So other people have described them. The biggest published case series is of 11 people from Norway, and 5 of those 11 said that they were religious or spiritual. Other people, and this is, people have mixed descriptions, but some people describe them as erotic. And I think that's very interesting given the close connection, particularly in the mystical writings, between the erotic and the divine love. language certainly crosses from one to the other. And then several people had symptoms or experiences during these attacks that they just couldn't describe. 8 out of the 11 induced these attacks in themselves. And it's a very common feature of this form of epilepsy that people will not take treatment because they enjoy the experience of these attacks. And so we had this conversation. So this is me speaking. I'm very clear. You have epilepsy. She says, well, that doesn't matter. I don't care. I'm quite clear that this is God speaking to me. I plough on. Well, I can take them away with anti-epileptic drugs. And she says, why would I want that? And it was actually that little conversation in an outpatient clinic in Addenbrooke's Hospital that got me interested and confused and puzzled about this relationship between brain diseases and faith. And the reason why I'm confused about it, and the reason why I wanted to bring it to your attention, is because of this fact, which is recorded very well by Dostoevsky. So, I'm sorry about all this text. So Prince Myshkin is describing how he feels about having these attacks. He's reflecting on his symptoms. And he says, they are due only to a disease. Therefore, they are a lower type of life. And as a neurologist, my default is, if you've got epilepsy, that's just bad. I mean, if we can get rid of it, that's good. Nothing that comes from epilepsy is good. Very straightforward. Prince Myshkin, however, says, even if it is a disease, when I recall and analyse the moment, it actually seems to be one of harmony and beauty, an instant of the deepest sensation, overflowing with unbound joy and rapture, ecstatic devotion and with completest life. There was indeed beauty and harmony in these abnormal moments that seemed to contain the highest synthesis of life, he could not doubt. So in the character of Prince Myshkin we see a conflict. And he goes on and says, these aren't the attacks that you get with lots of hashish or opium or wine, only one of which I have tried, but I agree.
Wait.
I'll tell if you tell. So it's different from that. These things are different. And the character says, I would give my whole life for this one instant, for these attacks. The feeling of intense beatitude in that crowded moment of a seizure made the moment worth a lifetime. And in the one quote from the Bible, in the whole of The Idiot, Prince Myshkin is said, quoting Revelations, there shall be no more time. His experience of these attacks has brought him into contact with the author of Revelation. Something divine has been touched. And Dostoevsky was able to write about these seizures in the character of Prince Myshkin so effectively because he had them himself. And really this is an autobiography of his seizures. And they remain, to my mind, the most powerful and accurate description of someone's attacks. Now, here's where I'm struggling, and I want you to think about this, and we will buzz about this in a little while. The question is, the theologian that I see values her attacks, and I think they're due to epilepsy. And how much credence should I, as a doctor, or more importantly for you as a pastor, give to this? If your member of your congregation or meeting comes to you bonkers, but says this is the word of God, do you encourage that, or do you in some way try and defuse or treat them or recommend some therapeutic action? And at the heart of that is the question, well, are these authentic spiritual experiences? If someone has a mystical experience due to epilepsy, or if if I really want to stress you due to hashish or opium or whatever, is that really God speaking? Are they authentic? Now, you will encounter this as a problem. You will encounter people telling you weird things and you thinking, is that from God or not? And if you haven't already, you just haven't done enough ministry. You're just not talking enough to people. Because people do have weird experiences. And I now have a little clinic where lots of people with weird experiences come and see me, and people say, is it God, is it epilepsy, is it this or is it that? And I have tried to find resources to help me. And the best, so far for me, is William James's book, which is a kind of old classic, The Varieties of Religious Experience, which, you know, everyone says it's to do this, but I think this should be mandatory reading for ordinands. But I bet none of you have read it, you miserable lot. I mean, that's what everyone says, don't they? So, in the history of Christian mysticism, the problem of how to discriminate between messages and experience, as it were, real divine miracles, and such others as the demon in his malice was able to counterfeit, thus making the religious person twofold more the child of hell than he was before, probably not necessary to have that there, has always been a difficult one to solve. In the end, it comes to our empiricist criterion. By their fruits you shall know them. So it's the one thing I want you to remember, if you're going to remember anything. So the more and more people come to me and tell me about weird things that they've experienced, the less and less I feel able to judge their authenticity on the grounds of what they're telling me about the experience. And more, I'm inclined to take this criterion. By their fruits you shall know them. So however bonkers this or that experience might be, it may well be from God, and we can tell by sitting down together and looking with the biblical test of the fruits of the Spirit in your life, and are they edified, illuminated by these experiences, or are they hindered? This lady had changes in her attacks. One attack occurred while she was on a train to somewhere, and she woke up in prison. And what had happened was she'd assaulted someone on the train, and she'd been arrested and she put in prison. She doesn't remember any of that. Recent attacks at the time of writing had taken her to hell, and her work had suffered. A religious community had ejected her, and she was having multiple partners of multiple genders. And by gospel criteria, if you like, her life was not showing the fruits of the Spirit. And therefore, inasmuch as I am in a position to adjudicate, I would say that her seizures were not leading to revelations of the divine. Well, I put that to her, and she respectively disagrees. She has agreed not to drive, which is a good thing, but we're in that impasse. And there are various studies, which have been quite small, looking at the religious life of people with temporal lobe epilepsy. This one I quite like, because these people, who are both British neurologists, decided they would have a control group. So they went to their local, they're both churchgoers, were churchgoers, liberal Anglican church. They felt that was the normative. And compared to their liberal Anglican congregation, people with temporal lobe epilepsy have a more florid, cosmic religion, more conscious of evil and the miraculous, and of the involvement of spirits, than in their liberal Anglican church. But they were chaotic and infrequent attenders of worship. And from the outside at least, did not seem to have a life lived in the Spirit. Now, I'm just going to move on, just in case you think this is all rather recherche. I just want to remind you about how common mystical experiences are. And This guy, Alasdair Hardy, who was a very orthodox and highly successful scientist, FRS, had an interest in spiritual experience later in his life, and he was interested in the response to this question. Have you ever been aware of or influenced by the presence or power, whether you call it God or not, which is different from your everyday self? He spent a lot of time thinking how to carefully phrase this. And sorry about this, which has gone wrong. But what I want you to see, this is old data going from 1962 through to 1987, and the answer to the Alasdair Hardy question is yes, at increasing frequency. Which I bet is not what you would have expected. So your average person on the street will say they have had one or two of these experiences in their life. And I've got some more recent data. So this is going up to 2009. This is just from the US. Again showing this increase in the people who will answer yes to the Alasdair Hardy question. And even in China, which I'm no expert, but I understand is the country with the fewest adherents to established religion, in 2014, and this project is still ongoing, you have over half of people answering yes to the Alasdair Hardy question. So the people you deal with in your congregation or in your outreach or whatever know what a mystical experience is. Another finding from the Alasdair Hardy Trust is that they won't have told anyone. So you can contact with them through discussion of these experiences. People with temporal lobe epilepsy and one or two other diseases may well have these much more frequently than the normal population, like my theologians. They may have these mystical experiences once or twice a day. And so you, in your own mind, I think, have to come to a view as to how much weight you want to put on the authenticity of these experiences and what to do with them, what to make of them. And I know full well that there'll be some people in this room who, like some of the churches in Cambridge, will want to say, these are meaningless. We don't want to talk about spiritual experience. There'll be some, because there are some churches in Cambridge who say this, who say, you're not a proper Christian unless you've had one of these divine experiences. And let's try and generate it now in this service. So, I'm actually going to stop there, just a bit over. I think you're sat in groups already, and I'd just like you to briefly discuss it. I'm not going to feed back at this point, so it's literally just a few minutes to say, what do we think about religious experiences in disease and in health? Do we think they're authentic or not? And when that person comes to me with the bonkers thing they're telling me, what am I going to do about it? Okay, go. No, good. Okay, I'm going to completely switch tack for you. That was a bit kind of exotic, unusual, wasn't it? This is very humdrum and serious. And this question will come to you. You know, I have Parkinson's disease, and I know 3 vicars who have Parkinson's disease in this area. Or my wife has Parkinson's disease, or my beloved church warden has Parkinson's disease, or dementia, or this or that. You know, what is going to happen to their faith, and what can we do to help them? So we've done a small study on Parkinson's disease, and I just want to present to you the findings, which you may or may not find interesting. You might also be interested, or not, in how you go about doing a study like this. It may be you've not thought about it, so there's some methodology here. So, here's the question. Number 1, if I get Parkinson's disease, what's going to happen to my spirituality, if anything? And is that a direct effect of damage in the part of the brain that Parkinson's disease impacts upon? Now, those are the kind of neurological nerd questions, but you may well have these questions. Does faith help me or my partner cope with Parkinson's disease? Does Parkinson's disease lead to a positive change in spirituality? And I don't think that's a daft question to ask, because of the witness of the saints that tells us that going through prolonged periods of illness can lead to spiritual growth. So if you look at the lives of Francis of Assisi, Julian of Norwich, there's no doubt that in the tapestry of their life, prolonged illness led to spiritual growth. So these are questions you might want to add on. So how can we study all of this? This is the sort of thing you have to take into account. So we have a disease, and that disease causes a number of different things. So clearly with Parkinson's, it reduces the ability to move, and so makes it more difficult to get to the synagogue or wherever. It also causes depression for a variety of different reasons, which leads to loss of motivation to do things, including to pray. In some people, but by no means all, Parkinson's disease leads to impaired thinking ability, so that leads to reduced understanding and memory. And then the big question that we were interested in is whether or not this disease led to a selective deficit in the ability of the brain's religious mechanisms to work, and so led to loss of religiosity. And you may say, well, that's just a bonkers idea. You may say that. But actually, several different papers in the literature suggest exactly that, all coming from one group. And here's the important point. If you get Parkinson's disease in the United States, you're given a patient information leaflet which says your spirituality will be impaired. So that is now standard information to people in the United States because of these studies. Now, these studies have one potential big flaw in them. So I'm talking methodology now, so I appreciate it's not very interesting, but too bad. So here's the flaw. The comparison in this group is between Parkinson's disease and healthy controls. Comparison in this group is between Parkinson's disease and people who have back pain, arthritis, or high cholesterol or high blood pressure. So why is this a problem? Well, the problem is that we're not controlling for some of the non-specific problems with Parkinson's. So what we have done is a much smaller study with Parkinson's disease and people who had diseases that did not affect the brain but did make them disabled. So we're trying to match this group with people who couldn't walk, had the same degree of depression, the same degree of impairment of their everyday life. And importantly, none of these people were selected because they said they were religious or not. These are, and I think you'll be interested in this, these are people off the street. So this is evangelism, at its greatest. This is non-selected people brought into this study, and then they're asked a whole lot of questions about religiosity. Another important way of controlling for confounders is that we studied each of these participants twice, at year 0 and then a year later, year 1. And what that means is that not only do we have a control of this group versus that group, but we can control changes we see here with there, changes we see here with there. And the idea of this is to minimize all the confounds. So we're now going to ask the question, is there a change in religiosity over a year of experiencing Parkinson's disease compared to over a year of being disabled from some other illness that doesn't affect the brain? And we do all of these tests. And I hope that you're deeply impressed by this. Particularly this one, which has a very long title. Yes?
And it's brief.
Beginning brief.
And it's brief.
And it's brief.
One thing is not, is brief. Joseph, poor thing, has had a look at this. It's not brief. And I want to just kind of spend a moment on this because if you're not involved in this world, as pastors now, or pastors to be, you may well read research like this and think, oh, I'm deeply impressed. These chaps in Cambridge are awfully clever. So this is the test that we use to assess someone's religiosity, and it literally is a questionnaire where people say, I feel God's presence many times a day, once in a while never. I find comfort in my religion many times, never. Already there's an assumption in this question that people have a religion, isn't there? And when we made this UK friendly, we took that out. We said religion or spirituality. This is a US study. Then there's negative things. I feel I'm being punished by God. I feel I've been abandoned by God. Again, tricky if you don't believe in God. So we have this higher power thing. There's a nice little bit on forgiveness. I'm forgiven by God. I do forgive those who hurt me. I feel forgiven. Interesting how that emerges as a core feature of religion. And then this is about practice. Do you actually pray? Do you actually meditate? And then later on, do you actually go to places of worship? This one you like. Being part of a congregation. If you were ill, how much would people help you? If you had a problem or faced with this decision, how much would people help you? So I was in a church once which had a curate, and she was very unwell. And she'd come from a different sort of church. And she phoned me to say, I was wondering when the meals would arrive. And I said, there's no chance. I'm afraid my church doesn't do that. Really interesting. She was used to meals just coming when people got ill. And that doesn't, I'm not saying it's a good thing about the congregation I was with. But we measure positive congregational support and also negative. How often do the people in your congregation stroke vicar make too many demands on you? You miserable lot. You see, you're making so many people guilty. So, you know, this has emerged as a useful question to ask people about their experience of life in a congregational setting. And there's all this other stuff. So I'm just going to go straight to some data here. I want to have some good conversation about this, that's why I've skipped stuff out. So these are the Parkinson's group, that's year 1, that's year 0. These are the controls, year 1, year 0. And these are different things we're measuring. So we measure mobility. And over a year of having Parkinson's disease, people's mobility deteriorates. Well, that's the disease we're expecting. Over a year of Parkinson's, people's memory deteriorates. Well, I'm afraid that is normal too. In this group, the ability to have attention, the ability to plan was intact over the year. So now we're going to say, let's look at some of these religious scores and see, do they decline? And if they decline, is it because people's mobility has deteriorated? They're just not getting to church. And if we exclude that, everything's okay. That'd be one option. Or is their religiosity score declining because their memory's not so good, so they're not scoring so well on some of the questions about reading scripture and stuff like that, because they've just lost it. So do you see how we're nicely set up to prize apart what we're going to see? Well, what we see is completely unexpected. So on every score of religiosity, people with Parkinson's disease are unaffected. In fact, the only change that was seen between year 1 and year 0 was in the control groups, who had a diminished overall spirituality score, which was down to a diminished participation, a reduced participation in community religious congregational life. Completely not what we were expecting.
Sorry, does this now mean it's statistically significant?
Yes, it does. Thank you. Yeah. So one of the conclusions then from this is it's okay. You get Parkinson's disease, your spirituality will be okay. So that, you know, I mean, that's the sort of prima facie conclusion, and that's quite reassuring. It means the patient information sheets in the US are wrong at one level. And we're going to be producing patient information for Parkinson's disease UK, which is a bit more positive. But we need to burrow into this a bit more. But on the data I've just shown you, that is it. There is nothing more to be said. And I hope some of you feel slightly dissatisfied by that. And because you're lovely, cuddly people, you want to talk to some of these people and ask them, well, what was the experience actually like for you? Autistic people like me don't want to do that. We like graphs, right? But you're cuddly pastors and you're going to talk. So we have a scientific equivalent of that. So Claire Redfern, who did this with me, conducted interviews, and this was really interesting. So this was a semi-structured interview, and it was analysed in a semi-structured way, but you don't need to kind of worry about that. So 3 out of the 42 Parkinson's disease patients said they blamed God or they felt abandoned. And I'm actually surprised it's such a low figure. That's my first comment. One person who was agnostic about God said his interest in spirituality had increased. It's made me more interested because sooner or later it's going to get worse and I need to find some way of coping. Do you think it'll help you cope? It's possible, yes. So already this idea that having a faith will protect you from the consequences of disease. This is an interesting comment from a Buddhist, and I hadn't thought about this before, but Parkinson's disease people have shakes, as you know, called dyskinesias, and this had interfered with her ability to meditate. So just sitting hard with the shaking. And I must say, that hadn't occurred to me, and it made me more sensitive now to thinking about advising people on prayer and posture and time of day and all of that stuff. Perhaps you should only pray or meditate at certain times after having your medication, for instance. Really practical point. Most of the Parkinson's disease patients, over half, said that the question about whether God existed or not was really important to them now. Now that's interesting, isn't it? I'm not sure that's a surprise, but it raises the question about the appropriateness or not of evangelism to this group. People are asking questions more than they were before about the existence of God. Should we be supplying them with the answer? Or is that manipulating people who are vulnerable? In many ways, evangelizing to men in their 30s is the most difficult thing you can possibly do. It's so resistant. But people who have the early phases of the disease, which is making them ask existential questions, maybe they're the group we should be focusing on. So this person who didn't have a formed religion said, I believe I'm not alone. I've been given this for a reason. I don't know what the reason is. I may find out one day. And I think this business of searching for reason is very prominent in those who are unwell. And trying to make sense. Now it works in a harmful way, and you will see this if you haven't already done this. You may have even done this yourself. I've got multiple sclerosis. Why have I got multiple sclerosis? Because I had an inappropriate sexual relationship when I was 17. This is me talking to myself. Or, I took that one sniff of cannabis at a party. And I'm not going to ask anyone whether that's right. I just know it and I feel guilty about it, and that never comes out. So that's the harmful side of this meaning attribution that takes place when people become sick. But there's also potentially a positive side, that people are motivated to look for the divine when previously they've been close to it. This Christian said, I'm always conscious there is somebody there to whom I can raise my problems. It would be very much a loss without that. Really interesting use of words. So that's someone who has a very personal, human relationship with God. It's an anchor. It helps me through difficult times. It's a good feeling. And when I read those, I thought, well, what sort of church, Christian congregation education have they had? Isn't this so good? At a time of difficulty, they've got words they can use. It's an anchor. Concepts that they have been instilled with, that they can resort to when they're unwell. So are we in our churches at the moment and synagogues appropriately resourcing people so that when times are hard they have concepts and language to draw on? So that is all my conclusion. It's a small study, but we do not find evidence for a selective deficit in religiosity, and I think that's important and helpful. But at the level of anecdote, we certainly find for some participants, spirituality provides solace and comfort, and for nearly, well over half of participants, the onset of this illness had raised existential questions in a meaningful way. So, what I'd like to do now is just open up for general questioning. We've got a quarter of an hour before tea. So I wondered if anyone wanted to reflect on any of that. Sam?
I'm just curious. I was just curious, the study you did was just a one-year study.
Yes.
And I just wonder if you progress that study
Yes.
for 2 or 3 years where the disease has a chance to really progress,
Yes.
whether you'd start to see
Absolutely.
significance.
No, I think ideally we do a longer study, and we may come back to those people. I mean, one of the things I didn't say, but just to impress on you the seriousness of this illness, is that 2 of our patients died in that year. So, changes are not trivial. But absolutely, going for a longer period of time would amplify the changes. Yeah, accept. So,
Sorry, just to clarify, the 0 years to 1 year, they weren't was that not necessarily from diagnosis?
no,
So
it was
they could
just,
have been at several varying stages of the
Indeed.
disease.
they had moderately severe Parkinson's to start off with. Yes. So it wasn't the first year of illness. Sorry, thank you. Clarify that. I'm aware people may know someone with Parkinson's disease, so I have to be really careful what I say.
Can I ask a question on the on more of your introduction? So, as someone who in 6 months will be ordained as a curate and town centre chaplain, the town centre one. So, and I'm told that we get
Which
a lot
town?
of Luton. So there we are. So we do get bless you, thank you. And apparently we do get quite a few of the people,
Yes.
the aforementioned people.
Yes.
What would your advice be to someone who's going to be a clergyman as to
Yes.
the best sort of training or equipping we can have to best help those people?
Yes.
From your perspective.
Yeah, so here's my opening gambit. Firstly, if your church does not contain unusual, bonkers, weird people, then I don't think you've got a healthy church. That's my first thing, right? If it's full of middle-class people with 2.2 children, you're in deep trouble, I think. So great that you're going to be ministering there. So one thing that the Americans do very well that we don't is gather in a congregation a little group of people who have the various skills you might need. So medical skills, nursing skills, psychiatry or psychology skills if you have them, and ministerial skills. And a very typical thing in a downtown New York church would be to have this medical committee who meet once a month and provide support to not only the minister but also the various visitors who go out on parish visiting. And I think that's really helpful if you can get that group of people. In this country and in the States we have parish nurses, which is something I would encourage you to all explore, who are employed within the church but who act in that medical capacity. And so when you're faced with that bonkers person who's really you can make no sense of, which is going to happen to you, that you have some way of defusing the situation and saying, this is all very helpful. We have a lunch club every Monday, right? And between now and Monday, I'm going to get on the phone and I'm going to describe to whichever one of that group you think is most appropriate what's occurred. And then gradually over time, through the lunch club meetings or whatever regular system you have, you can start to push them in the right direction, which might be still with you for healing ministry, or it might be best with the GP for treatment of their thyroid disease. At that starting position, you have no idea what's behind it. I don't know if anyone else has any comments to make about that. There are experienced pastors here who will have a view. So,
yes, we've mentioned epilepsy. Yes, we've mentioned. Sorry, off mute. That's okay. We've mentioned epilepsy, and I think you mentioned thyroid just now. I know that urinary infections can certainly produce some unusual hallucinatory effects.
yes.
What other medical conditions are the sort of would you point to that can have these sort of effects?
Yeah, I mean, if I started, it would take me till Monday to finish. That's the point, really. And I think you'd appreciate, this, you'd accept this sympathetically, but my medical colleagues wouldn't, is that actually any disease will have some impact on our physical, mental and spiritual well-being. Any disease will. Even if it's, if it's something kind of like my wrist being injured, that does have a spiritual impact, even if at a low level. So your example of a urinary tract infection leading to people having hallucinations, absolutely true, particularly in the elderly, particularly on those who are on the cusp of dementia or have had other brain illnesses, terribly common. And your awareness of that means that when the next elderly person comes talking about Jesus or whatever, in the back of your mind you're thinking, well, maybe they just need antibiotics. And I think that's a perfectly appropriate, sober, realistic thing to have in mind.
Yeah, I was talking to a non-Christian but open-minded friend a couple of years ago who'd seen a Derren Brown show where he'd kind of engineered a spiritual experience, and I saw it later, and it was by the use of cues and suggestions, and he was sort of doing various things with his hands. He engineered this sort of spiritual experience, and it did really look like an authentic spiritual experience. It was on a woman, and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry," and then she said, "Oh, thank you, Father," and things like that. And my friend was saying, look, it makes me think this is all just kind of smoke and mirrors, and it's all just kind of trickery, tricks of the brain, and so on. Well, I said, I think it was something quite similar to what you said. I said, well, if that was a false spiritual experience, a couple of weeks later, nothing, it wouldn't have changed her in any way. But I was wondering, A, do you think that could have been an authentic spiritual experience? And B, how might you deal pastorally with people whose faith or incipient faith is kind of threatened by that kind of show?
Yeah, and I think the first thing that we should say openly is that the business of being church is about engineering spiritual experiences. Now, if that sounds difficult for you, let me just amplify what I'm saying. So if you think of your next service that you're planning, whatever type it is, you have a particular audience in mind who you, at some level or another, are going to try and satisfy with a particular type of music and a particular type of sermon, particular length. And if you don't think this is right, just imagine now going in with a evensong choir to your church, or a Holy Trinity Brompton, rock group thing. You know that one of those isn't going to work, right? So you are engineering spiritual experiences in your church, whether you like it or not. So I think you need to recognise that. Now, the question is, are you kind of mandating it and determining it? And how much wobble room are you leaving for people to express dissent and dissatisfaction and being allowed to leave, so that they can find somewhere else that's best? So I think a good church, again, will allow dissent, will allow variety of opinions, and allow people to leave. There's no doubt that we can engineer spiritual experiences. Whirling dervishes do it by gross physical exertion and dehydration. And anyone who's run a marathon, as I have recently, very slowly, you do have weird experiences when you get dehydrated and overexerted. The lone sailors, have very strange experiences, and taking mescaline or taking LSD. So there's no doubt these can be engineered. Can they be authentic and from God? And I've come to the view that sometimes they can be. So I've heard people tell me very bonkers things from very unusual situations, which has led to transformation and growth. And I've really backed off from being a judge about the experience itself.
My brother, can you? Hang on a minute, I'm going to go with you first.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and then I'll come round to it.
You've focused a lot on the positive aspect of sort of mental and brain things going and leading to God. I wonder if you could say something about the negative aspect. You touched on it with the woman who said she thought she'd experienced hell. It's something that I don't know whether it's the part of the church I come from, but in my experience, people are as likely to come to you with a genuine fear about, I mean, they express it in terms of haunting or demonic possession or whatever, they are as likely to come to you with that as they are a positive.
Yeah.
Sort of out of body,
No,
mental experience.
I think
you
that's
just
really,
say some stuff about.
it's really helpful to have that question. And if you come away from here thinking that I think this is all positive, then that's an error I have made. So I think you're absolutely right. People are just as likely to have very negative experiences, and I would say you should take them just as seriously and carefully as the positive one. By their fruit shall you know them. So it's perfectly possible to have a urinary tract infection and see the devil, and you need antibiotics. You don't need exorcism. But likewise, I do think people can genuinely experience evil and be permanently harmed by that, even through, I mean, but very classically through a psychotic experience, and be harmed for years later. And I think spiritual healing has a place for that person. So just as seriously and just as cautiously as the positive experience. Yeah. And for sure people will come to you.
Just sharing some reflections as a pastor, Church of England parish priest, rural South Oxfordshire. Yes, you're open to having conversations with a whole lot of people. Just to sort of share how I coped with it, my response has been a paradigm of safety. Basically, I thought, is this a situation where, first of all, I'm safe?
Yeah.
Well, is there something that this individual is telling me which is putting their safety at risk, or they're saying they're about to, I don't know, knock somebody over the head or whatever? And so that's the way I sort of cope with it, whether it's right or wrong, I don't know. It's just a purely practical approach. So if I feel that there isn't a safety issue, I just listen. And then if there's a safety issue, I do what I can, whether it's sort of physically making sure that I'm safe, or if sometimes it might, well, yes, to do whatever's necessary. So that's the sort of.
I think that's a really important point, and I'm sorry I didn't touch on it. So as you go about your ministries, you need to have strategies for avoiding being in difficult situations, don't you?
Well, the correct answer, of course, at theological college is happen. Yeah. And then, so thinking what you do, just a quick little story. Somebody wanted to talk to me about stuff. They said, oh, can I see them at home? I thought, right, I need. They were having some sort of attack, and I was worried, and so I thought, right, I need to make sure grasp, so that if they make a sudden launch at me, a lunge at me, situation. But in day-to-day work, you come across these situations, so you just try your best.
Thank you.
Can I just recommend a resource, which I found here. It's an essay by C.S. Lewis called Transposition.
Yes.
And I think he explains very clearly there the difference between what we experience and reality, and gives some ideas on how to distinguish.
Yes, thank you, that's helpful. Yeah, I agree.
As assistant hospital chaplain, I'm often called to a bedside, and people tend to open up, particularly being a woman, to some experiences that they've had either in hospital or before they come into hospital. And without going into any detail, the simplest way I can say I've let them go with that knowledge is to say, this is very real to you, and do you feel it's changed your life? How has this affected you? And often they will say, I feel I'm a different person because I've had that experience. Now, for some people that might not be enough. If that's a positive thing, that's fine. Equally, I've had people say, I'm possessed by a demon. I said, how does that affect you? How do you feel? Do you want to live with this demon, or do you want to get rid of the demon? Depending on how they feel, I will deal with it. It's very much, we're told, patient-led. We're not counsellors, we just let the patient talk to us, and then from there we get the solution or try to help them. I don't know if that's helpful to anybody.
I think the difference between being a chaplain in a hospital and being a pastor out there in the wild is that you may be the only professional as a pastor out in the wild that person has seen. In a hospital situation, you know that there are nurses and medics buzzing around who hopefully will know whether this person is psychotic or not. It may well be a little Taddle come in the mud. This person in front of you has not had any professional encounter with anyone, and you're the only person. And that puts a big responsibility on you to have some sort of clinical feel, I think, which is where having a backup team can be helpful.
It was a question about that backup team, which I think is a brilliant idea. And I was visiting someone with mental health problems, and I desperately wanted some more professional advice. Another life in education, try and get involved with the health service, and partnership working was really difficult.
Yeah.
Have you got any advice or lead about how we can get that cooperation between church, spirituality and the medical teams, as it were?
It's a very good question, and it is really difficult. There are some good examples of good practice. So there are examples of churches in whom a GP is a member and they've formed a strong link with the local GP practice, but it takes years to build up trust. Because on the whole, the staff in that GP practice will be mistrustful of the church as a default. I think a very good way in is parish nursing. So if you don't know about parish nursing, Google it. But the idea is that your congregation will employ a nurse for 1 day a week, 2 days a week, or 3 days a week, who's a fully certified trained nurse who works for the community. And there's an overall body, the Parish Nursing UK, which will help regulate that person and provide guidance. But when this works well, that's a person who the medics and the GP practice recognises as being part of their tribe and talk the right language, but also can come back to the church and make those links. And that can be a really positive way of bridging the gap.
Thank you.
Just a couple more and then...
Just quickly following on from that one, what do non-Anglicans do?
Parish church is not Anglican. It's across all Christian denominations. Unfortunately, parish is an inappropriate term. Yeah.
I'm trying to give everybody one go each.
When you read about spiritual experiences in the Bible, what's your take on it? Do you take on it as a clinician or as a pastor or what?
So you've heard my position. So I used to kind of think, or is that a seizure? Did Paul have a seizure on the road to Damascus, which is a common one? I've now become completely agnostic about it and say I just don't know, and I don't care at one level, because clearly in the life of Paul, unless you disagree, that we see the fruit of the Spirit. So that really did lead to transformation and growth. So I don't mind what happened. So my increasing knowledge has made me more ignorant, if you see what I mean.
That'd be a good thing,
or less concerned.
I think always our increasing knowledge should make us more...
Or less concerned.
Yeah. Okay. Did you have one quick comment, Nigel?
In this diocese, for those in this diocese, for those who are faced by the potential area of exorcism, there are advisors who we are asked to make sure we contact, because it's a complicated area.
Well, not only this diocese, in every diocese. It's an obligatory part of being in the Church of England. Hallelujah. And there's also a healing ministry team advising on healing. So that's the kind of the yin and the yang of it. So there is help out there.
Just one thing. I did a mental health first aid course with Mental Health England. I don't know if that's something you'd recommend, but I certainly found it quite practical and helpful in understanding if you've never come across someone with a mental health issue before, as in their background, just how to help them in terms of listening and whether or not you should try and disagree with them or rationalise with it. But it was very practical in the sense of just listening, and I don't know if you had any point.
That's very helpful. I didn't know about that course, so that's helpful. The other thing to look out for is to try and get badged as a dementia-friendly church, so that you go through the Alzheimer's Society. You can download their stuff, and that is a very positive sign that we as a congregation are going to make our church friendly for people with memory problems. And there's a bit of training around that as well. We can't all be all of these things, can we? So my view would be that in our congregation we need to build up a team who cover these bases. I mean, there'll be people here who are experts in Deuteronomy for whom all of this is just too much, and that's fine as long as they're surrounding themselves with people like you who've got the nous and the interest to learn these things.
Great. Well, I didn't get the chance to introduce Alasdair before he started because I was in a loop. But as you probably guessed, he's a clinical neuroscience professor at Addenbrooke's, but he's also an ordained priest and a chaplain at Addenbrooke's, and I think you would say we've benefited from that bringing together of his experience. So let's thank him tremendously.